Nobody in Oakland Municipal Auditorium that night was looking at Bruce Lee when it started. They were looking at the finger. One finger, a woman's index finger, extended straight out, nail painted red, the tip of it 1 inch from the chest of the most dangerous man in the room. Her arm was shaking, not from fear, not from weakness, but from the specific trembling that lives in a human body when 40 years of grief and 7 years of silence and one very clear purpose have finally arrived at the same moment, at the same place, and there is nothing left to hold them back. Oakland Municipal Auditorium, November 14th, 1969. 5,000 people in the seats. Camera flashbulbs firing from the floor. A martial arts demonstration that had been proceeding until 30 seconds ago exactly as scheduled. And then this. She had walked from the 4th row to the stage alone. Nobody had stopped her. She was 58 years old, 5'2", and she was wearing a blue silk dress that belonged to a funeral, not a Friday night. She had purchased her ticket 3 weeks earlier. She had sat in seat 4G, 4th row center, for 40 minutes without moving, watching a man in a black uniform move across a stage the way water moves, without resistance, without effort, without a single wasted motion. And then she stood up. She walked to the stage. She stepped up without assistance. She crossed the mat in 12 steps. She stopped 1 arm's length from Bruce Lee, and she raised her finger, and she set it into the nearest microphone, loudly and clearly and without any hesitation at all. You are not a martial artist. You are a performer, a clown who sold what did not belong to him. You are a disgrace to everything this art was built to protect. She paused for 1 second. You are a fake. The word hit the speakers and rolled through 5,000 people like a stone dropped into still water. And for 3 full seconds, nobody in that building made a sound. Bruce Lee did not step back. His hands stayed at his sides. His face did not change. He looked at the woman in the blue silk dress, the way a man looks when he has been waiting, not for this moment specifically, but for the truth underneath it, for a very long time. Then he took 1 step toward her. He said 2 words, quietly, only the front row heard them. And the woman who had walked to that stage knowing exactly what she was going to say and exactly what she was going to do, stopped. Something moved beneath the certainty in her face. The way fault lines move beneath solid ground, invisible until the moment they are not. 5,000 people leaned forward in their seats because they had just realized that whatever was happening on that stage was not what any of them had expected. What Bruce Lee knew, what he had been carrying for 15 years in a breast pocket, against his heart, through every fight and every film and every accusation, was something that would not just answer her, it would change her. Stay with this story. What he pulls from that pocket in the next 4 minutes is something no one in that arena, including her, will ever see coming. The sound that 5,000 people made in the 3 seconds after that word landed was not a sound most people have ever heard. It was not booing. It was not cheering. It was something between those 2 things, a low, pressurized murmur that moves through a large crowd when nobody can decide yet whose side they are on. But every person in the building understands that a side is about to need to be chosen. Half of the people in that auditorium were martial artists. They knew exactly what a public accusation on a public stage meant, and exactly how much courage, or grief, or rage, or some combination of all 3 it required to deliver one. The other half had come for a Friday night demonstration, and were now watching something that had stopped being a demonstration the moment that finger went up. At the floor-level press position, the tournament photographer, who had been shooting for 40 minutes without pause, lowered his camera. He would explain it later by saying simply that there are moments you cannot frame. In the front row, 3 of Bruce Lee's senior students had risen to their feet. James Lee, Dan Lee, Jerry Poteet, men who had trained under him for years and who understood better than anyone else in that building the weight of what had just been said. James Lee took one step toward the stage stairs. Bruce Lee raised his right hand without looking at him, palm out. One gesture. The meaning was clear. Do not move. This is not yours to answer. The woman was still standing at the center of the mat. She had not lowered her finger. She had not looked away. In her right hand, held flat against her thigh, was a folded piece of paper, a single paragraph, a formal accusation she had written and rehearsed and planned to read aloud into that microphone. She had not unfolded it. When she stood in front of Bruce Lee, the words had come from somewhere older and more certain than rehearsal, from the place grief goes when it has been sitting still long enough to become something harder than grief, something that feels from the inside exactly like justice. Her name was Mrs. Lily Chen. She was not a protester. She was not a rival school representative. She was not here for attention or for argument. She was a widow. Her husband had died 22 months ago, and she had not been inside a space this large since the morning they put him in the ground. To understand what happens next, what Bruce Lee does, what he says, what he takes out of his pocket and places in her hands, you have to go back. Not to Oakland, not to 1969. You have to go back 15 years, to a rooftop in Kowloon, to the hottest July on record, and to a 14-year-old boy who arrived with a bruised eye and asked the one question that changed everything. Kowloon, Hong Kong, July 1954. The kind of heat that doesn't cool after sundown. On the third floor of a narrow building on Tung Choi Street, a corrugated iron roof turned the training hall beneath it into something close to an oven, from 6 in the morning until well past midnight. Students trained anyway. They had been training in that room for years, and the heat had long ago stopped being a complaint and become simply part of the instruction. One more thing the body had to learn to be still inside of. The school had 12 students, not 12 at a time, 12 total. The master who ran it had kept that number for 30 years because he believed that teaching more than 12 people at once was not teaching, it was performance, and he had no interest in performance. His name was Master Chen Wei. He was 44 years old in the summer of 1954. He had been born in Guangdong Province and had trained under a direct lineage student of Ip Man before the lineage divided, and the men who carried it scattered across Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, and eventually the world. He had arrived in Hong Kong in 1946, the same year that staying on the mainland had become dangerous for men who knew too much and said too little. He brought with him a set of principles, a disciplined silence, and a single rule he had never broken in 30 years of teaching. He did not accept a student until that student had demonstrated they understood what they were asking to receive. 30 years, one exception. The exception arrived on a Tuesday morning in July 1954. He was 14 years old, 5'3", 98 pounds. He had a bruised left eye from a street fight the previous night in the Mong Kok district, where a gang called the Tigers of Junction Street had been making a reputation for themselves among boys who had nothing better to do with their energy than spend it on each other. His father, the well-known Cantonese opera actor Lee Hoi Chun, had made arrangements for the boy to find a teacher before the streets finished what they had started. The boy had not been told which teacher. He had found this rooftop on his own. He stood at the top of the stairs and looked at Chen Wei and did not introduce himself and did not bow and did not say any of the things students usually say when they arrive at a school for the first time. He asked one question: why do most people lose a fight before they even throw a punch? Chen Wei looked at the boy for a long time, long enough that 2 of the 12 students stopped their practice and looked over. Then he said 4 words: "Come back tomorrow, alone." What happened over the next 3 years on that rooftop, before Ip Man, before Hollywood, before any of the names and titles and films that would make this boy the most recognized martial artist on earth, was the foundation that everything else was built on. The principle Chen Wei gave him was not a technique. It was a philosophy. That form is the cage, that the fighter who escapes the cage first has already won, that the art does not belong to any style, any school, any people. It belongs to the moment when one human being needs it. Chen Wei died in San Francisco in the spring of 1967. He was buried in the Chinese cemetery in Colma, 14 miles south of the city, on a Thursday morning with 11 people present. He left behind 40 years of handwritten training notes and a wife named Lily, who had been beside him for 31 of those years, and who, in the months after the funeral, sat at their kitchen table and read every page of those notes, looking for the man she had lost. What she found in those pages, and what she concluded from what she found, was the reason she was standing on a stage in Oakland 2 years later, with her finger 1 inch from Bruce Lee's chest. She had the wrong conclusion, but she had the right grief. In the months after Master Chen Wei's funeral, Lily Chen did what grieving people do when the person they have lost was also the person who made sense of the world. She went looking for him in the only places he had left behind. She read his notebooks, all of them, 40 years of training notes written in a careful, precise hand. Observations about footwork, about centerline theory, about the relationship between a fighter's weight distribution and the geometry of force. She read them the way you read letters from someone who cannot write back, slowly, more than once, looking for the man between the words. By the 3rd month, she had read every page 47 times. And then, on a Tuesday evening in November 1967, her neighbor called her into the living room to watch a television program. A young Chinese-American man was being interviewed on a Hollywood talk show. He was 27 years old. He moved his hands when he spoke in a way that was difficult to look away from. He talked about martial arts as a philosophy rather than a fighting system. He used words and concepts that Lily Chen had seen, unmistakably, in her husband's notebooks. The same vocabulary, the same framework, the same idea that form is the cage, that the art belongs to the moment, not the method. The man's name was Bruce Lee. She did not sleep that night. What she concluded was the only conclusion available to a woman who did not know what had happened on a rooftop in Kowloon in July 1954. She concluded that her husband's work had been taken, that this man had accessed Chen Wei's notes, his principles, his life's philosophy, and had built a career on them without acknowledgement, without permission, without ever once saying the name of the man who had built the foundation he was standing on. She was wrong, but the conclusion was not unreasonable. It was simply built on a missing piece. What she did not know, what no one outside of that Kowloon rooftop had ever been told, was that Bruce Lee had never spoken publicly about Chen Wei. Not once. In every interview about his training history, he named Ip Man. He described the Wing Chun lineage. He talked about his years of study with care and precision. But he never named the rooftop. He never named the 44-year-old man who had looked at a 14-year-old boy with a bruised eye and decided, for the first and only time in 30 years, to make an exception. He had not hidden it to protect himself. He had kept it private to protect it. The way Chen Wei had taught him to protect what matters most. Not by locking it away, but by living it so completely that it doesn't need a label. But Lily Chen did not know this. And so for 2 years, from November 1967 to November 1969, she watched Bruce Lee's career grow larger and more visible and more celebrated. And every interview, and every demonstration, and every magazine cover landed on her kitchen table like another piece of evidence in a case she was building alone, in silence, without telling her daughters or her husband's former students or anyone who might have talked her out of what she was becoming certain she needed to do. She wrote the accusation in October 1969. 1 paragraph. She rewrote it 6 times until every word was the right word and nothing in it could be misunderstood. She purchased one ticket, seat 4G, fourth row center, Oakland Municipal Auditorium, November 14th, 1969. She had one plan: walk to the stage, say the truth, make it public, make it permanent. What she did not have, what no plan she could have made would have accounted for, was the possibility that the man on that stage had been waiting, without knowing he was waiting, for exactly this moment to arrive. Because in the right breast pocket of Bruce Lee's black uniform, against his chest, through every demonstration and every film set and every challenge and every year since 1967, there was something that made her conclusion not just wrong, but the opposite of the truth. And he had been carrying it for 15 years. What is in that pocket has been there since the year her husband died. Stay with this. Back on the stage, back to November 14th, 1969. The silence after her two words, "You are a fake," had lasted 3 seconds. Bruce Lee had taken one step toward her and said two words that cracked something open in her face. He had raised his hand to stop his students from moving, and now 5,000 people were watching a 29-year-old man in a black uniform stand completely still in front of a 58-year-old widow and make a decision. He could have stepped to the microphone. He could have told 5,000 people exactly who Chen Wei was, and exactly what he owed him, and exactly how the principles Lily Chen had found in her husband's notebooks had traveled from a corrugated iron rooftop in Kowloon to a stage in Oakland, California. He could have made the case. He could have made it thoroughly and precisely, and with enough specific detail that no one in that building would have left with any doubt about who had stolen from whom, and who had spent 15 years honoring a debt that no one else even knew existed. He could have won the argument in 4 minutes. He did not do this. He understood something in that moment that most people in that auditorium would spend the rest of their lives learning to understand. That winning an argument and honoring a teacher are not the same thing. That the woman standing in front of him had not come to Oakland because she wanted to be defeated. She had come because she was carrying something that had grown too heavy to carry alone. And you do not answer that by being right. You answer it by giving her the thing she has actually been looking for, which is not a correction. It is a connection to the man she lost. He reached into the right breast pocket of his black uniform. He had carried what was there every time he had given a public demonstration since 1967, not as proof, not as protection, as a reminder of where everything he knew had come from and who had trusted him with it. He produced a photograph, black and white, 3.5 inches by 5 inches. The white border yellowed at the corners from 15 years of living against a human chest. A rooftop in Kowloon, July 1954. 2 figures standing side by side in the flat white heat of a Hong Kong summer. On the left, a man who is 44 years old, whose face Lily Chen has known for her entire adult life, whose hands she held in a San Francisco hospital room on a March morning in 1967 while he stopped breathing. On the right, a boy who is 14 years old and weighs 98 pounds, and whose eyes are already doing the thing that would one day make him famous, looking at the world as though he can see something in it that no one else has found yet. He held it out to her, face down. He waited until she took it from his hand. Then he said it quietly, in Cantonese, so that only she and the first row could hear. "I never sold what your husband gave me. I spent my whole life trying to be worthy of it. I am sorry I did not find you sooner." She turned the photograph over. She looked at the photograph for 11 seconds. The cameras at floor level caught every one of them. The tournament photographer who had lowered his camera earlier had raised it again, not because he had decided to shoot, but because his hands had lifted it without instruction from any conscious part of his mind. That is what the human body does when it is witnessing something it knows it will never witness again. She did not speak. She could not speak. What moved through her face in those 11 seconds was not a single emotion. It was the specific dissolution that happens when a grief you have been carrying in one shape for 7 years suddenly reveals that it was always a different shape entirely. She had walked onto that stage believing her husband's legacy was being stolen, diminished, exploited, erased. She was holding evidence that her husband's legacy was the living foundation of the most famous martial artist in the world. Not stolen, not erased, carried, for 15 years, across an ocean, in a breast pocket pressed against a beating heart. To every demonstration, every film set, every stage. Bruce Lee stepped back. He turned to face 5,000 people. He did not explain what had happened. He did not narrate it, or name it, or offer any version of it to the audience that was still sitting forward in their seats, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. He bowed. The deep bow of a student, not a champion, not a performer, directed at the woman still standing on his stage, holding a black and white photograph with both hands. The bow lasted 4 seconds. He straightened. He resumed the demonstration. He never spoke about that night publicly. Not once. Not ever. In the 4th row, seat 4G, Lily Chen sat back down. She did not look up for the remainder of the demonstration. She held the photograph in her lap with both hands for the next 90 minutes. The way you hold something that has just given you back a piece of a person you thought you had lost completely. Ed Parker stood at the side of the stage and said one thing to the man beside him. "He didn't defeat her," Parker said. "He gave her something she didn't know she'd lost." Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. He was 32 years old. He left behind a wife named Linda, 2 children, Brandon, age 8, and Shannon, age 4. He left behind a philosophy written across dozens of private notebooks that the world would spend the next 50 years trying to fully understand. And in the top drawer of his desk in Bel Air, alongside Chen Wei's original training principles, copied in a 14-year-old boy's handwriting, there was a letter. 12 lines, written in a careful hand, postmarked San Francisco, December 1969, 6 weeks after Oakland. Lily Chen had written it at the same kitchen table where she had written her accusation. She wrote that her husband had kept one rule above all others in 40 years of teaching, that the art must never be protected by hiding it. It must be protected by living it, so completely, so faithfully, so without reservation, that the art itself becomes the proof of the man who gave it. She wrote that until November 14th, 1969, she had not known that Bruce Lee had followed that rule more faithfully than anyone her husband had ever taught. She signed it simply, "From the widow of your first teacher." The photograph hung in her home until she passed away in San Francisco in 1989. Her daughters kept it. They keep it still. What happened in Oakland Auditorium on that Friday night was not a confrontation. It was a correction of a story told wrong for 15 years, answered not with words, not with force, but with a worn black and white photograph of a boy and his teacher. A rooftop, Kowloon, July 1954. If this story moved you, subscribe, because every week we bring you the moments history almost forgot, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today.